The letter was still intact, hidden deep in the drawer of his office. The envelope smelled of lavender and had delicate lines of insecure handwriting, like someone who writes with trembling but with their heart wide open. He never read it. He never had the courage. He said it was poetry, but he was afraid of what those words could provoke inside him. And on any given day, one of those days when pride seems stronger than love, he tore it apart. He tore it apart without opening it. He tore it apart, like someone cutting off the last chance of redemption. And when he finally looked for it, he found only silence. A silence that carried everything he never had the courage to feel. The letter was still intact, hidden deep in the drawer of his office. The envelope smelled of lavender and had delicate lines of insecure handwriting, like someone who writes with trembling, but with their heart wide open. He never read it. He never had the courage. He said it was poetry, but he was afraid of what? Those words could provoke inside him. And on any given day, one of those days when pride seems stronger than love, he tore it apart. He tore it apart without opening it. He tore it apart like someone cutting off the last chance of redemption. And when he finally looked for it, he found only silence, a silence that carried everything he never had the courage to feel. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. She walked around the house without making a sound, as if she already knew that there was no room for those who feel too much. She always wore the same worn-out shoes, her hair tied with a faded blue bow, and she wore a light perfume that reminded her of lavender after the rain. When she passed by the hallway, he watched her. She pretended to read newspapers or review contracts, but his eyes always sought her out in the gaps in the silence. She wasn't a woman of many gestures, but she had a way of folding napkins that seemed affectionate, of closing the windows as if she were protecting a secret. And he noticed. He understood everything, but he didn't say anything. He called it professionalism, but deep down it was fear. In that mansion with its white columns and endless dinners, she was the only living thing that didn't need a frame. She wasn't a decorative presence like the other women who frequented the salons. She was simple, real, but invisible. His mother, Mrs. Eleanor, made a point of reminding her of this with a look or a cutting phrase. And yet, she stayed. Maybe because, despite the veiled humiliations, there was a kind of look in his eyes that hurt more than any indifference, the look that asked her not to leave. She poured coffee with steady hands, but her heart skipped a beat when she saw him. Sometimes I forgot to breathe as he walked by. Other times, he left short notes under the cup. Have a good day, sir, just to let me know he was there. He would say when no one was listening that she was poetry. Poetry that could not be recited aloud, that should be hidden between the pages of a book that no one else opens. One morning, after a dinner where she was ignored like a shadow, she left early. But before she left, he left her a letter, a simple envelope with his name handwritten on it, placed on the old wooden table where he used to drink whiskey in the evenings. The paper smelled of lavender, and the writing was shaky but delicate. He found the letter hours later. He picked it up. He smelled it, recognized the line, and he froze. His heart raced, his throat closed, and he put the letter in the drawer, without reading it, as if not opening it was safer than facing the possibility that someone truly loved you, without demanding anything in return. That night he drank more than usual, and he slept with his hand on the closed drawer, as if he could stop the world from changing just because someone dared to love him without fear. The letter stayed there, for days, untouched, until his fear spoke louder and destiny began to prepare to collect the bill. He had always had everything money could buy, except the courage to feel. He was admired in social circles, respected at business dinners, feared by investors and flattered by women who knew how to smile with just their lips, but none of them made him lose his balance like that maid who walked with light steps. And sincere eyes. He pretended not to notice, but every detail of her pierced him like a secret he tried to deny. The way she tied her apron, the way she arranged the books on the shelf, the care she took in folding the blanket on the sofa after he fell asleep watching news programs he didn't even listen to. She was a presence even in the silence, and it was this silence that frightened him the most. For weeks, the letter remained forgotten in the drawer, not forgotten by chance, forgotten out. Of cowardice. He saw it every night, placed glasses of whiskey next to it, thought about opening it, but the weight of his choices always prevented him. After all, she did not belong to his world. That was what he kept telling himself, as if he were trying to convince not his family but his own heart. And yet her presence was still there, even absent. Like an echo, like a song he pretended not to hear, but that lulled him when no one was looking. He remembered one particular night, a dinner, with old friends, all heirs to fortunes, sitting around the table like bored gods. One of them commented on the nice waitress with sad eyes, who had served the wine. They laughed. He pretended to laugh too, but his hand shook as he lifted his glass. That night she had waited longer than usual for him to collect the glasses, and when she finally entered the room, he had looked at her for real, not as a boss, not as a rich man, but as someone who, for a second, wanted to apologize for the way the world was unfair to people like her. "Good evening, sir," she said, and her voice was low but full of unspoken things. He wanted to respond, to say something, to make a gesture, but he just nodded and looked away. She was gone, and he felt an emptiness that had no name. The letter that night seemed heavier in the drawer, and he took it out. He looked at the envelope with trembling fingers. He ran his eyes over the name written in blue ink. He thought about the words that would be inside. Words that might change everything. Words that might ask for a gesture, a response, an answer. And that's why he didn't read it. He put it away again, because love required something he never had: surrender. The next morning she brought him coffee as usual, but there was something different in her eyes, as if she already knew he hadn't read it, as if she had already accepted that some hearts don't even have the courage to open an envelope. She poured it, looked at it for a second, and left, without waiting for a reply. And in that moment he felt like he was missing something, but he didn't know how much yet. That rainy afternoon, she sat in the back of the bus with a folded sheet of paper between her fingers. It was plain paper, but it carried what she had never had the courage to say out loud. The letter began with, "Sorry if this is too much," followed by uncertain sentences full of pauses and hesitations. She didn't want to scare him. She just wanted to record what she felt. Every time she saw him trying to appear invulnerable, she wrote about how she noticed the way he looked out at the rain when he thought no one was looking, about how he always left the button on his left sleeve a little loose, and about how she wanted to be more than the woman who cleaned the silverware after cold dinners. The letter also spoke of gratitude, for the way he never treated her rudely, even when the world around him seemed to think she didn't exist. But most of all, the letter spoke of love. A silent love, which was content with crumbs of presence, which was warmed by the few seconds of closeness when she poured coffee and their fingers almost touched. It was a love without demands, but full of truth. She hesitated before handing it over. She thought about tearing it up, but something inside her told her that even if he never read it, she had to get it out. Writing it was like crying without tears. Leaving the letter on his desk was like exposing her soul naked, with fear. But with dignity. She didn't expect a response, but she also didn't expect to be ignored. In the days that followed, she continued working as if nothing had happened. She tidied the rooms, organized the books, served the dishes with steady hands, but his eyes, those no longer shone. He acted normally as if the letter had never existed, and that hurt more than any clear rejection. She expected at least a gesture, a longer look, a question, but he was silent. A cruel silence, disguised as control. One night she went into the library to put away the forgotten books on the table. He was there, sitting, alone. She noticed the envelope on the desk, still sealed. Her heart sank. In that moment she understood everything. He hadn't read it, and not reading it was perhaps the most cowardly way to reject someone. Not reading it was saying, "I don't want to know how you feel." She finished putting away her books and left without saying a word. But inside, a piece of her remained there, trapped in that folded letter. A part of her still hoped that, who knows, one night he would overcome his own fear. But her time was running out. He spent his days staring at the letter as if it were a mirror he didn't want to look at. It was there, intact, in the same place he had kept it, among contracts and cold papers that decided fortunes. Sometimes I would open the drawer just to confirm that it was still there. But I never touched it. I never read it. Her handwritten name hurt more than... He admitted. It was as if each letter screamed what he pretended not to hear, that someone really saw him, and he never knew how to deal with it. That week, her father returned from a business trip. The house was full of important guests, and routine once again revolved around appearances. At a dinner with investors, everyone was impeccably dressed. The table was perfect. The conversation was shallow. She came in to serve dessert, and when she placed the plate in front of his father, he didn't. For even say thank you. He said something under his breath about the kind of people who move into other people's houses like cheap furniture. She didn't react, but her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the dish on the table. He saw it, the son, the man who said she was poetry. He saw it and kept quiet. He pretended not to hear. He pretended it didn't hurt, because admitting it there in front of those people would be like tearing up the papers of power that had always protected his reputation, and he chose silence. He chose to keep himself clean before the world, even though inside he was already falling apart. That night, she stayed up late, tidying up the kitchen in silence. Her co-worker watched her, quieter than usual. When the clock passed 10, she grabbed her coat, walked into the living room, and paused for a moment in front of her desk. The letter was still there, untouched, unopened. She didn't take it back. She just sighed, looked down, and walked away. The sound of the door closing echoed in the empty house. The next day she didn't show up. A brief call informing him that she had resigned. No explanation, no goodbyes, no note, no complaint. Just silence. He stood in front of the phone for long minutes, holding the receiver as if her voice was still on the other end, as if he could call her back with the strength of regret alone. But he didn't call, because his pride still spoke louder. That morning, drunk on guilt and whiskey, he opened the drawer, took out the envelope, ran his fingers over her name. He squeezed it. He closed his eyes. He inhaled the scent of lavender that still lingered. And in a fit of rage against himself, he tore it up. He tore up the letter, as if he wanted to erase what he hadn't had the courage to live. And when the pieces fell onto the desk, he realized he had destroyed the only true thing anyone had ever given him. But now, it was too late. The next morning dawned strangely bright. The sun flooded the rooms of the mansion, as if it wanted to illuminate what remained hidden between the polished furniture and the accumulated silences. He went down the stairs with his eyes sunken, his face expressionless. He passed through the living room and felt its absence as if it were an invisible wall. The coffee was bitter, the newspaper meaningless. The entire house seemed like an empty stage where the main characters had left, all of them except him. He tried to pretend that nothing had changed. He continued, with his appointments, his business lunches, his social smiles, but there was something weighing on his chest, like an unspoken name. People asked him why he was quieter. He blamed it on fatigue, the market, his travels. But the truth was that, for the first time, he felt the pain of the absence of someone he had never had the courage to hold by the hand. The days passed, and he began to look for her in the details, in the way the new employee folded the dish towels, different, in the way they served the coffee, hurriedly, in the absence of the simple note under the cup, a silence that hurt. He tried to move on, but he found himself looking for her in the places where she used to be, in the soft footsteps on the back stairs, in the corner of her mouth that smiled modestly, in the sound of the keys turning at 6:30. None of that existed anymore. One afternoon, when he opened the drawer to look for a document, he saw the pieces of the letter still there, crumpled, torn, like a heart that had been crushed before it could even be welcomed. He picked them up one by one, trying to put them together, glue them together, understand them. But it was impossible. The words were cut off. The meaning was lost, and the scent of lavender now seemed to mock him. He went to the back garden, the place where she liked to water the flowers even when no one asked. The lavender still grew there. He knelt down, picked a sprig, and stood there in silence. His eyes were watery, his breathing heavy. For the first time he cried, and it wasn't out of longing, it was out of cowardice. Meanwhile, she was rebuilding her own life far away. In a small town with cobblestone streets and craft fairs, she was starting over, lighter, more confident, still with a trace of pain in her eyes, but with a whole heart, because she had never given up her dignity, even though she had offered everything she felt. He didn't know, but he had already lost, not to another man, but to silence itself. She walked between simple tents made of colorful canvas, now dressed in clothes she had sewn herself, her hair loose in the wind, and a new peace that did not match the cold corridors of that mansion she had left in silence. There was a serenity on her face that had not existed before, a gentleness without submission. She lived with little, but she lived truthfully, with soul, with the scent of lavender on her hands. She sold handmade soaps, handmade notebooks, and brief smiles, the kind that come after you have cried all you need to. Sometimes she still thought about him, not with hurt or with longing, but with the kind of memory that we only revisit when we are strong enough not to bleed. She remembered his eyes trying to hide something that might have been love, or maybe just pride. And she wondered every now and then if he had even read the letter. She had no idea that he had torn it up. She had no idea how much it hurt him now. He, in turn, had become a ghost inside his own house. The destroyed letter was a weight that followed him into every room. He began to write compulsively, loose passages, scribbles on napkins, sentences lost in notebooks. He tried to recreate what he didn't remember, trying to guess what she would have said. "Did you really see me, or did you only see what you wanted to control?" he wrote one night, his eyes moist. "Did I serve you coffee, or did I give you little pieces of my heart?" He scribbled another morning, but no sentence sounded, as alive as the silence she had left. One night, he wandered aimlessly through the streets of a nearby town until fate, or karma, led him to a square where a fair was taking place. He was about to turn back when he caught a familiar scent. Lavender, as if the memory had materialized in the air. He followed the scent to a small stall with sewn-cover notebooks, soaps made with dried flowers, and a woman with her back turned, packing something. His heart stopped for a second. It was her. Even from afar he recognized her gentle gesture, the way she moved lightly. He wanted to get closer, but he remained still, stuck. She turned for a moment, looked around, and their eyes met. Time froze. There was no anger, no tears, just a firm, serene gaze that said everything the letter never had time to say. He tried to smile, but he didn't know how. She didn't smile back. She just lowered her eyes and went back to what she was doing. And in that gesture, so small, so definitive, he understood. She was no longer waiting for him. Never again. He stood there for long minutes, unsure whether to advance or retreat, like a man faced with his last chance to say what he never had the courage to say. But her gaze, serene and unreachable, gave him the answer before he could even move. She was at peace, and her peace no longer needed him. For the first time he felt the real weight of the loss. It was not a physical absence, it was an absence of hope, and that no fortune can buy back. She returned, home with red eyes, but not from crying, from helplessness, from having been a coward, from having let a flower wither between her fingers just because she didn't know how to water it. The mansion now looked like a mausoleum. Every piece of furniture carried the sound of her footsteps. Every corner hid a memory, a gesture, an unspoken word. The new employee did everything right, but without a soul. The coffee was hot, but without a story. The scent of the house had gone back to being just expensive wood and disinfectant. Nothing smelled like lavender anymore. He went back to his desk. The pieces of the letter were still there, like an unsolved crime. He tried to glue them together. He read disconnected fragments. "I'm not asking you to love me. I just wanted to be seen, If I leave, know that—" Each incomplete sentence seemed to tear pieces of him apart. He thought about writing a reply, a new letter. But to whom? She wasn't there anymore. And perhaps she would never again accept even hearing his name. He then decided to write to himself. In the back of an old notebook, he wrote down everything he had never had the courage to say. "You were my salvation, and I buried you alive with my fear. I said you were poetry, but I never learned to read verses written with truth. You loved me before I even knew I was lovable." At the bottom of the page, he drew an envelope, a way of symbolizing what he had destroyed. He looked at the drawing for minutes, his hands trembling. Then he closed the notebook and hid it behind his books, as if he still didn't have the courage to face himself, as if, even as I wrote, I still wanted to pretend that none of it was real. But it was. And it hurt. And it would never be different. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the library chair, staring at the half-open door, as if he was still waiting for her to come in and tell him everything was okay. But all that came was the sound of the wind, blowing the curtains. He thought about going back to the fair, about asking for forgiveness, about trying to start over, but he knew that time doesn't go back. Time doesn't listen to belated apologies. The next morning, when he opened the window, he saw a lavender plant growing between the cracks in the wall, a forgotten seed, perhaps a reminder of her. He knelt there, touched the plant carefully, as if asking for forgiveness with his fingers, and for the first time, he understood that the only way to honor a love he had not known how to live was to never forget it, nor pretend it did not hurt, nor blame fate. He remained there, kneeling before the flower, because sometimes all that is left is to bow before what one did not have the courage to love. And it was there, alone with the lavender, that he began to understand what true love was. From that day on, every morning he would go to the wall, where the lavender grew silently. He would sit for a few minutes, as if waiting for a miracle or a ghost from the past. He never plucked the flower. He just observed it. It was the only place in the house that still seemed alive. The rest had become a large hall of memories that judged him at every step. He tried to get back into his routine, but everything seemed pointless. He hired new architects, redecorated the rooms, installed modern works, but nothing could hide the echo of her absence. He wondered how something so simple had affected him so deeply. A woman with no jewelry, no diploma, no status. A woman who had only seen him, who had listened to him even when he pretended not to speak, and who had left with dignity, without shouting, without begging, without making a scene. This absence had eaten away at him more than any other. It was not a public loss. It was an intimate loss, invisible. One afternoon, while rummaging through old documents, he found a photo of her, small, stuck to an old badge. Her face was serious, but with a hint of tenderness. He took the image and put it inside a book. "Modern poetry," the cover said. He smiled awkwardly. I wanted to see it as a sign. He decided it was time to leave the mansion. I needed to breathe another city, another air. Maybe, just maybe, I would meet her again, even if it was from afar. He left on a cloudy morning. He rented an ordinary car, without a driver, without a suit, without a shield, guided by memories and questions. The road seemed to talk to him, the songs on the radio, the trees passing by as if they knew where he was going. He arrived in the small town late in the afternoon. Everything there was calm, almost frozen in time. He walked along cobblestone streets, entered simple bakeries, looked at the windows of thrift stores, until he saw in the distance the same soap and notebook stall, the same lavender. His heart raced. She was there, sitting, calmly sewing a notebook. Her hair tied up differently. Her clothes were more colorful. But it was her, whole, calm. He approached slowly. The ground seemed to give way with each step. She saw him. The world froze. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes moist. She took a deep breath. She looked at him as if she were looking at an old photograph, with respect, but without longing. "Sure," he said. They sat in silence, Neither of them seemed to know where to begin. He tried to smile, but failed. He held out a sheet of paper, one of the pieces of paper he had glued together from the torn letter. "I kept it," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't keep it well, but I kept what I could." She looked at the paper, then back at him. There was compassion in her eyes, but there was no opening. "I didn't write expecting a response," she replied. "I wrote to make peace with myself." He nodded, respecting every word. He didn't apologize. He just said thank you. He said thank you for being loved in a way he never understood. She stood up. She left a bar of lavender soap on the table as a sweet farewell. "Take care of the flower that grew on your wall. It can still grow." He understood. And he stood there watching her walk away, stronger than ever. He sat there for a long time, with the lavender soap in his hands, as if holding what was left of a past that he himself had destroyed. The soft scent invaded his chest like a memory that was both sweet and painful at the same time. It wasn't a reunion. It was closure. And deep down, he knew. She didn't hate him. She didn't hold a grudge. But she also didn't expect him anymore. And maybe that would have hurt more than if she had turned her face away, shouted, thrown sharp words. Her silence was what hurt the most. He walked back to the car slowly, as if carrying on his shoulders all the years he had wasted in silence. When he got into the vehicle, he didn't start the engine. He stood there, looking out the window, watching ordinary people pass by with shopping bags and sincere smiles. He remembered how many times she would come into the house with her hands full and her eyes tired, but never without tenderness, and how many times he preferred to look away, fearing what that would awaken in him. That same night, he found a simple hotel and decided to spend a few days there. I felt I needed to stay longer. Not for her, she had already gone into herself, but for him, to face the remains of what he had not had the courage to experience. He walked down streets that she might have also walked, sat on park benches, visited the small local library, and, on impulse, left an anonymous note between the pages of a book of poems. "To the woman who taught a man to feel even when he did not know how. I didn't expect her to find him. I didn't expect anything. But writing that was like lifting a stone from my chest. For the first time his pain had a name, a form, a gesture. It was regret. And this, unlike guilt, carried love." On the third day, he was walking down the street where the soap stand was. She wasn't there. The stand was still set up, but another woman was working. He approached and asked about her. The saleswoman kindly simply said, "She comes back when she wants, but she's fine, she's happy." He smiled, his eyes brimming with tears, and replied, "Thank goodness." On the way back to the hotel, he bought a handmade notebook with a blue fabric cover. In it he wrote the letter he had never had the courage to write, not to her, to himself. He wrote everything, his fear, his admiration, his regret, his love. Each line was like sewing his own skin. In the end, he closed the notebook, tied it with a ribbon and left it under the lavender on the wall of his house a few days later. When he returned, a symbolic gesture, not for her to see, but so that time would know that he had learned, that even those who destroy a poem can one day try to write one, and for the first time he felt that perhaps he was no longer the same man, because there are losses that cannot be repaired, but rather molded, and there are loves that do not return but transform. He did not know what would come next, but he knew that from then on nothing would be empty, because even when torn, a letter written with truth remains alive within those who dared to feel. The days began to flow again, but something inside him had slowed down. The mansion, once a symbol of power and heritage, now felt like a silent sanctuary to everything he had lost out of fear. He didn't try to forget her, quite the opposite. He began to preserve the little things that still reminded him of her: a porcelain cup she had used to serve coffee, the pot of lavender in the garden that he now watered with his own hands, the old kitchen towel that bore the marks of sun and time. It was as if he were caring for the last vestiges of a love that had not blossomed but had taken root. Without fanfare, he changed his habits. He began to walk through the nearby streets, to talk to people he had previously ignored, to listen to simple stories from neighbors, gardeners, taxi drivers. He discovered that there was life outside the walls he had built, and that none of these lives needed to know the weight he carried. It was a guilt he no longer wanted to hide, but he also didn't need to confess it out loud. All he had to do was live differently. One afternoon, sitting in the backyard with a pen in his hand, he wrote on the back of a receipt, "To love is not to say, it is to understand." He folded it up and put it in his pocket, as if that were the summary of everything he had learned too late. The blue notebook was still tucked away in the back of his closet. Sometimes he would open it to reread it to himself, and every time he would end up with tears in his eyes, not from pain, but from lucidity. The following spring, the lavender grew more than ever. The wall seemed to be embraced by the flowers, as if nature wanted to give it another chance. One day, walking through the neighborhood, he saw a young woman with a basket of handmade notebooks in her hands. He approached her. She was from the same cooperative where she worked. The girl smiled and offered him one of the notebooks. He recognized the stitching, the fabric, the care. He asked without pretense, "Do you know her?" The girl nodded. "She now gives bookbinding classes. She is one of the best." He smiled sweetly. "She always was," he replied. He paid for the notebook and left in silence. He didn't ask for an address. He didn't leave a name. He simply took with him another piece of her, in the form of art and healing. At home, he opened the new notebook and wrote just one sentence. "If I had read your letter in time, perhaps I would have learned to live before I learned to lose." It was her way of not running away anymore, of accepting that some people pass by to awaken what life alone does not teach, and that certain loves, even if not lived, continue to be eternal, in what they left, in what they taught, in what they shaped. That night, he slept with the window open, letting the scent of lavender enter. He dreamed of her, not as a memory, but as a presence. She walked through a flowery field, free, light, serene. He simply watched her from afar, without interfering, without interrupting. When he woke up, he felt something different. It was no longer guilt, it was peace. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled to himself, as if he were forgiving what was, and allowing himself what could still be. Time passed like a slow song, the kind that you don't notice when it ends. He no longer expected reunions, he no longer counted the days or harbored fanciful hopes, but there was a new kind of hope within him, not for reclaiming what had been, but for honoring what was left. Every gesture, no matter how small, became a form of silent homage. He wasn't a man who had changed overnight, but he was someone who no longer ran away from the mirror. He began visiting local schools, donating books, and funding small renovations in community libraries. When asked why, he would simply say, "Someone taught me that education is more than words. It's about seeing." No one fully understood, but they respected him. This wealthy man, once known for his cold business dealings, was now remembered for sitting with children on rugs and reading stories in low voices. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he got emotional, especially when he read stories about unsent letters, forgotten promises, or talking flowers. One late afternoon, as he was walking through the garden, he saw a child standing in front of the lavender. She was the daughter of the new cook, and she was looking at the flowers with delight. He approached her slowly and asked, "Do you like these flowers?" The girl nodded. "They seem to feel, don't they?" she said naturally. He knelt down beside her and replied with a smile, "Yes, they do. They know how to keep secrets." And there, in that simple moment, he understood that the love he had lost was alive, in the seeds. He was now planting. He began to tend to the garden more often. His hands, once accustomed to pens, now knew how to handle soil. It was as if each flower that grew was a gesture of redemption. He began to write little letters to himself. He put them in envelopes and kept them inside books scattered around the house. I didn't expect anyone to read them. It was just a way to keep listening to that voice he learned to recognize too late, the voice of truth. At night, he would leave the window open. so that the scent of lavender would bring him peace. Sometimes he would dream of her. Other times he would simply feel her presence as he sat at his desk and wrote, not to ask for forgiveness, but to give thanks, because that was all he had left now. Gratitude. In one of the notes he wrote to himself, he wrote, "Some loves never end, they only turn into fertile silence." He repeated this phrase as a prayer. When someone asked him if he had ever been married, he would simply smile and answer, "Not in the way you think, but I was loved with an intensity that taught me how to live." And with that, he would end the subject. Not out of shame, but out of reverence. Because I had finally understood that some stories don't need an audience to be eternal. All that's needed is a garden, a sincere heart, and a letter that, even though torn, left too many seeds to be forgotten. That morning the sky was brighter than usual. He woke before sunrise with a strange feeling that something new was approaching, not as a sudden change, but as the silent completion of a long and profound cycle. He opened the window and breathed in the cool air that carried the scent of lavender. His heart felt calm, as if all the pain had been reorganized within him into the form of roots. He went downstairs and made his own coffee without rushing. Where she used to leave notes, he now left words for himself. Simple things. Breathe. Remember. She existed. He wrote not to relive, but to keep his affection alive. It was his way of not letting the world harden what love had softened. He took the blue notebook, the one where he had written everything he had never said, and put it inside a wooden box. Along with it, he added the porcelain cup, the dried lavender soap, and the note he had written on the back of the receipt. He sealed the box with thick tape and labeled it, "For those who forget to feel." He knew no one would find it any time soon, but it didn't matter. It was the gesture that transformed him. That same day he decided to visit the fair again, not with the intention of seeing her, but to rediscover that feeling of simplicity that she left wherever she went. He walked among the stalls, bought fruit, and observed ordinary people with lives that fit into cloth bags. The sound of their voices mixed with the smell of freshly baked bread brought him a peace that he didn't know he needed. And then, by chance or fate, she saw the soaps again. She wasn't the one selling them, but there was a sign next to the stall, bookbinding course, and every Tuesday at 5 p.m. The address was simple, close by. She didn't think twice. She went. She sat on the back bench in the small room among the ladies and teenagers, without saying who she was. She came in a few minutes later, smiling, carrying notebooks and fabric. Their eyes met for a second. She recognized him, but she wasn't scared. She just nodded lightly, as if she understood that time had passed, that the pain no longer bleeds. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, grateful. During the lesson, she explained how to fold paper, how to join the pieces together with patience and care. "Each stitch is a memory sewn together," she said. He wrote that sentence down silently, because now all he did was that, stitch together memories. At the end of the class, he was the last one to leave. He passed by her desk and in a low voice simply said, "Thank you for sewing what I didn't even know how to hold." She smiled with her eyes, as if she understood the depth of a simple gesture, and she replied, "You were the one who learned the thread." He walked to the door without looking back, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to go back, because he understood that some reunions aren't meant to be relived, they're meant to be sealed. And in that silent farewell, their story found peace. The years passed like leaves blown by the wind. The city changed, people came and went, but he remained firm. Silent, living a life that no longer needed to be explained. He became a discreet but respected figure. The children in the neighborhood called him the Notebook Man, and he smiled. He never said no to a piece of advice, a story, or a flower picked from his own garden. The lavender-covered wall became a curious landmark in the neighborhood. They said there was something special about that house, as if time had a different frequency there. And perhaps it did, because inside it lived someone who had learned in his own way to get through regret without sinking. who didn't erase the pain, but transformed it into tenderness. One day, when he opened his old mailbox, he found a cream-colored envelope with firm, delicate handwriting. He recognized it immediately. His heart skipped a beat as if he had gone back in time. He opened it slowly, as if opening a memory. Inside was a short letter. It said, "I found one of your letters in a book in the library. It took me a while to understand that it wasn't a request, it was a loving goodbye. Thank you for being there. I hope you're well. I am." He read the letter many times. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He just smiled with teary eyes. It was the closure he didn't even know was still missing. The confirmation that love, even if it hadn't been lived as he wanted, was felt. And that was enough. That night, he wrote again. But not to you. He wrote a story. Their story. No names, no dates, just feelings. He turned his memories into a book with hand-sewn pages, a blue cover, and the title embroidered in white thread. The letter I didn't read. He published a few copies, left them in cafes, libraries, schools. He never signed them. It was an anonymous gift for anyone who needed to remember that not all endings are ruins, some are roots, and that not all love needs a stage. Some just need silence, courage, and time. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench, he saw a young woman reading his book. She held the pages carefully, marked with colorful post-its. When she finished, she closed the copy, smiled at the sky, and hugged the book to her chest. He watched from afar without saying anything. But in that moment, he felt that something had been returned to him. Not the love lost, but the love planted. That was what she had always been. A seed. And now finally, he had learned to bloom as well. In the fall of that same year, he decided to do something he had been putting off for a long time. He wrote one last letter, addressed to no one, or maybe to everyone. In it he said, "If you are reading this, it is because you have found something that I hid from someone I once was. I ask that you keep this story with care and that you do not forget it, because every pain that becomes a word, every absence that becomes a gesture, every guilt that becomes tenderness, deserves to continue." He placed the letter inside the blue notebook and buried it at the foot of the lavender bush. He did it without ceremony, only with respect, with steady hands and a calm heart. It was not a tomb, it was a marker, a place where he deposited not the remains of a love, but the entire harvest of a feeling that, although not lived as dreamed, had borne fruit. And so, on that ground, between silent roots and resistant petals, he left the last part of himself. Not as a farewell, but as a beginning, because true love, even when rejected, is the only one that remains where no one else has the courage to stay, in the invisible. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave a like now. It helps this channel reach more people who also need to remember that true love never dies. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and if you felt something while reading this far, comment below. Even though it was torn, the letter still lives inside me. I'll read them all. And before you leave, click on the video that's showing on your screen right now. It's another story that will make you feel it all over again. See you there.